Just when you think you've heard it all, just when you think you've gone through the flat earth thing, you've gone through the giant trees and mountains or the stumps of giant trees, and you don't think you could hear any more, possibly any more, out comes a new one. Now, this mud flood, mud flaps, mud slide, muddy waters thing, whatever it's called, is unfucking believable, even by any standards. This goes even beyond it. The idea is the belief. Now wait till you hear this one. This conspiracy is so, this bullshit is so intense, I'm going to have to wear sunglasses to get through the rest of this video. Okay, now I think I can handle talking about it. There's a belief that, it seems a bit strange, but the belief is that, or the story is that every so often the earth floods with mud by the elites or whatever, the Jews, whatever, and they kill everybody. And the proof of this is buildings that look like the same from all over the world. What they call buildings that have Greco or Roman features. And basically that's it. That's the conspiracy. And what they use to prove this, apart from the fact that you have buildings with Greco-Roman features, is photographs from 1800s with no people in them. And also buildings that where the windows are lower than the ground level, and the ground level is moved up and slanted and windows have been bricked up, to say that the mud flooded in, killed all the humans, went rock hard, and then it was like a reset, and then the Illuminati or whoever had restarted it again. Now, where do you even begin with the stupidity of something like this? But let me explain to you how this comes about. How people get into believing bullshit like this. It's a dynamic that has two aspects to it. The first one is truth, or these truthers. That truth is like an addiction. And they want a bigger fix each time. 9/11 is a huge fix. This kind of thing, false flags. Every time a false flag happens, it's a drug addict getting a fix of adrenaline. When that law slowed down, they started getting into the flat earth. The flat earth is like a needle freebasing speedballs into their system to get more adrenaline. When that started to taper off, they got into the big trees, and the mountains are actually the stumps of gigantic trees. And now we have this mud flood, mud flaps, whatever thing. This is like speedballing heroin, freebasing again. To fill that addiction. If you go to a lot of truth events, especially the ones that are like hardcore, you see a lot of people chain smoking and stuff like this and fidgeting. They've addictive personalities, and a lot of them reek of skunk. So they're constantly skinning up, constantly smoking cigarettes, constantly fidgeting. And this is a large number of the truther population. They're constantly looking for a new fix. And this is the latest fix of the drug. That's one side of the dynamic. The other side of the dynamic is these people who set themselves up as commentators or truth gurus or whatever you want to call themselves, leaders of people, they are otherwise unemployable. And you know, they don't have weekend jobs like I do. They don't write books like I do. They don't publish. They don't do paintings like I do. They don't do odd jobs now and again like I do to pay my bills. They're completely dependent upon their audience being addicted to the truth that they put out. So therefore, they have to always jump on these bandwagons when they happen. Now, if they don't fully go into them as a full flat tard or a full mud tard, they will go, isn't it interesting that? Isn't it interesting this? Isn't it interesting that? Now, the first one you hear is that there's these buildings that have Greco-Roman features all over the world. Well, let me explain something to you. That was called, you're not educated, so you're not in a position to be demanding the truth because you lack basic education. There was an architectural movement that started in the mid-1700s called the Neoclassical revival. The Neoclassical revival was based on the idea of building larger structures that were taller in medieval cities, and in order to accomplish this there were things called wide streets commissions, where they replaced the medieval infrastructure of cities that were constantly burning down and going on fire. And this is why the fire of London in 1666 was the last great fire like this. But American cities continued to burn for a lot longer because so many buildings were built of wood and butted up against one another. They needed to build larger buildings for civic buildings, and there was a good reason for this. They could put all the deeds, the titles, the birth certs, and all the legal documents, as well as the money, in these large buildings that had to be tall and fire resistant. They could not use flying buttresses like they did on the Gothic cathedrals, because flying buttresses take up a huge amount of footprint on the landscape. So what they did was, because just about everybody who was powerful back then was a Freemason, and Freemasons are in love with the classical world, they discovered that our pagan ancestors were absolutely geniuses at construction. And they looked at the Parthenon in Rome, they looked at the Acropolis, the Temple of Diana in Athens, and the Temple of Delphi, and all over the classical world, and realized that that's the ideal construction system. One, it will allow us to build larger, stronger, fireproof buildings. It will allow us to take advantage of these wide streets we're building, and it will also honour the classical belief that many of these Freemasons had. This is why they called their slaves. They gave them Roman names like Flavius and things like this. They saw themselves as the Roman revival, like a second Renaissance. And so they knocked down the centre of cities, including my hometown Dublin, and they built these broad, wide streets. This was to prevent fire. And because these streets were broadened and widened, and all the public buildings and things like theatres and banks and anything became a statement of the power, they built in this neoclassical architecture using Doric, Corinthian columns, Roman columns, and all the other friezes, the same building ratios of the golden mean up the front. They realized how fantastic the pagan Romans and Greeks were at construction, and said this is the ideal way for it. It took them this long. Christianity had messed up the West so long. It took them nearly 2,000 years to get back to what the Christians had destroyed. And they started building the neoclassical buildings. They're everywhere. Every city in the West, and even in the East. And that's why in Tokyo, after the firebombing happened, you have a neoclassical building still standing, because the whole of the city was burnt down, mostly made of wood. The neoclassical buildings, they stand intact. They're always the same. They have columns on the front. They have the 2-2-1 window arrangement, and then they have the dome on the top, and usually there's a statue on top of the dome or a spire or something. But that's classic neoclassical architecture. The Capitol building in Washington DC, the White House, the Customs House here in Dublin, and numerous buildings in London and Paris, more than you could have mentioned. Neoclassical architecture. So, and it was ideal because if it was a big fire around it, the flames could not spread into where the buildings were. And that's why they were built. Not because they actually come from Grecian or ancient Roman or Grecian times, but because they were revival in an architectural style to suit a civic, technical and Freemasonic mandate of the period. Neoclassical architecture is not classical architecture in the same way the Stray Cats rock and roll are not Bill Haley and the Comets. You understand? They're called revivals, right? Now, in American cities, the evidence they present are American cities where you have neoclassical architecture, which, remember, it became a status symbol built by Freemasons. So they were going to follow this idea. So you have you see pictures of cities in the American Midwest to the east, and they're showing pictures of, say, a neoclassical design of building, and there's nothing around it. That's because, unlike European cities, they were building on a blank slate. The same happened in Canada and in Australia. That's why there's no trees. They went into a field, they made it into a subdivision, and they cleared it down. The first thing they would build would be the civic buildings, town halls, banks, built in the neoclassical style. You understand? That's why there's no trees around them. They hadn't been planted yet. That's why there's no houses around them. They hadn't been built yet. And why there's no people around them, and I'm amazed I'm having to explain it, is when these buildings were built and photographed, you had long exposure times on photographic plates. The lens cap was taken off, right? 20-second exposure, 30-second exposure, put back on. If anyone was moving in the frame of the picture, the emulsion film on the back of the photographic plate wouldn't get them until they stood still. And this is why the only pictures of people who are photographed, this is why there's so few photographs of battles actually happening, because people are moving. They're all pictures of generals like this or soldiers like that are relaxing, because they could say to them, can you hold still for about a minute, guys? And that's why there's no people in those pictures. They're milling around. They're usually construction workers building a new city. And that's why. Now, why you have the windows halfway up on an angular mud? Well, that's very common all over America. Lots of the bedrock is in the north, particularly in northeast America, New England. The bedrock is very low to soil, and if you go through New England, you'll often see buildings channeled into the bedrock, and even Pennsylvania, channeled into the side of a hill where the bedrock is right there. Now, because these buildings were designed from the base to the top, in America, because the climate is different than Europe, they build basements. They don't have the same damp problem you get in the British Isles and Ireland. They build basements. So the building was designed from the basement level up to the roof. So the first thing was they would design according to the depth they were down. Build a basement and then the first floor on top of that. The first floor was not ground level because that was not the level of the building. The level of the building was the basement, and then the first floor may have to be adjusted through things like bricking up windows and so on to accommodate the lay of the land, but they would already have done that. The front of the house will never have that problem. It's always the back of the house where the slope is at the top. So that even shows the mud flood theory for how stupid it is, because did all the houses all get hit from the back? It's ridiculous. Now, this idea that everything is wiped out and reset, what would be the purpose of that? Absolutely no purpose of that. It's just one more Christianized thing of Armageddon coming to get you. That there's going to be a judgment day and you're powerless and you have to worry about it. Nibiru, Jesus, judgment day, the end of the world, the great event, builds up your adrenaline because you never have to do anything meaningful in your own life. You just wait for the next addiction. Now, I know that my audience would not fall for the mud flood thing because generally, like I said, I'm very proud of my highly intelligent audience. But there are people who get into this stuff at first and they're learning about things and they get confused and they get caught up in these, and that's what they are. They're psychological operations, not run by the intelligence services. They're psychological operations run by the truth industry in order to keep their donations coming, to keep people in a state of fear, in a state of terror, had them afraid of all-seeing eyes, pyramids, and now mud. There is no Nibiru. It never came. It won't come. That's not to say there's a great planet out there, but it's the same thing. Nibiru is Jesus. You understand? Coming back, redemption day. You've got to stop this stuff. You've got to grow up and mature. Just because you have someone on the radio or someone on a website saying this, you don't have to automatically believe it. And if you do, you have to ask serious questions about yourself, both intellectually and behaviourally, as to why you want to. I watched one of these videos yesterday, and honest to God, I felt my cognitive abilities failing. My neural pathways, I felt like they were actually melting in my skull and dribbling out through my ears. It was so fucking stupid. Stop it.